Hey, yo!
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to Real Politik. Welcome back after our commercial break. We want to shout out today the toilet industry. They're doing the Lord's work everywhere, providing necessary equipment to people to perform bodily functions into, and I applaud them. They're the backbone of our proud nation.
I'll tell you, I got a toilet and I haven't looked back.
Great, man. Ever since they brought them in, you don't have to go to the outhouse anymore. The 1940s is great, man. It's really cool that they set up the NHS, and we're gonna have TV soon. Like a decade or so in Britain.
Wow.
Maybe 20 years if we're poor. Anyway,
what more do we need? NHS, toilets, and TV.
And the defeat of fascism. Wait, let me finish. In Germany and Italy and some other places, but not in, yeah. In Eastern
very specific
Europe.
strands.
Yeah, exactly. Defeat of Hitler and Mussolini, and
keep it simple.
Hirohito, I guess. But Japanese Empire is a whole different. It's its own thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really fascism. They were just natural.
They were allies of convenience. Yeah, I mean, not that they weren't right wing.
They were fucking right wing, yeah. But you know, right wing. It's broad church. No, I don't know. I can't really tell you the nuances of what the Hirohito.
I'd say the biggest difference is just that their colonialism kind of came out of a defensive reaction to Western colonialism. So it's perhaps ethically somewhat different and obviously culturally distinct, but not great either.
Yeah.
My take, as a white guy. So shall we talk about some Costa-Gavras?
Yes, let's talk about Costa-Gavras. Now
the more serious segment of this recording.
Yeah, let's move away from fascism, Nazis, and violent right-wing dictatorial. Wait, what? Hang on, I've just checked the notes, and this is the last thing I expected. Yeah, okay, we're going to be talking about a couple more. Well, I'm going to be mentioning a bunch of films, but there's two that we've both watched in this.
Yes.
We're going to talk about some Costa-Gavras films, because he is probably, at this point, one of my favourite filmmakers. There's a lot to get...
I can see why.
Yeah, there's a hell of a lot to get into politically on this film. Well, it's because I just love films about right-wing totalitarianism, as you know. No, but this isn't like, why, like, when I'm like, oh, I love a good right-wing film, like, explaining away my love of Clint Eastwood. These are left-wing films.
Critical.
No, these are left-wing films that are critical of the right, as you say.
Yeah, definitely. I feel Missing was very loud about that.
Yeah. And State of Siege. I
mean, they all were. State of Siege.
State of Siege has more moral complexity to it, because I do think it's critical of the leftist revolutionaries. But on the other hand, and we'll get to that as well, by the way. Like, I got some bullshit liberal fucking New York Times article to quote from. But anyway, so.
But Missing is pretty solidly Pinochet sucks.
Yeah. So you watched that and State of Siege, didn't you? So those are two films he made.
Yes.
He made.
Those are the two Costa-Gavras films I'm prepared to talk about today.
Yeah, Costa-Gavras is a Greek filmmaker, but he's made films in various countries. These two films are both made in and set in Latin America. Again, we can get into the specifics of that a bit later on, because in both cases they're not made in the country they're set in. But
right.
He actually, despite being Greek, never made a film in Greece until 2019, which was his film The Adults in the Room, written by Yanis Varoufakis, a film about the Greek debt crisis. I'm looking forward to digging into that. Yeah, and look out for a forthcoming edition of our friend Emmett Cruddas' Film Greys podcast, where I'll be on there and we'll be talking about Costa-Gavras, and we'll be talking about The Adults in the Room, which I haven't watched yet, so we're not really going to be talking about it today. But the reason why Costa-Gavras never made a film in Greece until 2019, as he just came of age as Greece was overtaken by a right-wing military dictatorship. So just as he was getting interested in going off and making films, the conditions in Greece were just not right for that, and wouldn't be for many years to come. And his classic film from 1969, Zed, covers that. When I said I'd seen 10 films by him, I've now seen 10 3/4, because I watched the first hour of The Sleeping Car Murders today, and it's actually a really dope film. That was his directorial debut. It's not really political at all. It's just a really good thriller with cool fucking French new wave editing and all that good shit, and just like...
Because did he make a lot of his films in France?
Yeah, predominantly his films are French movies, but he's obviously gone around the world. And it's pretty internationalist in his outlook, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
Like
he's clearly coming from a leftist perspective and all.
100%. Like, he's made films about Greece, about France, about America, about Uruguay, about Chile, about the Nazi Empire, basically. Because Our Men takes place in a few different Nazi-occupied countries. But he's done a lot of interesting stuff. And like I say, even when he did go to America, which he did for a little while, he still made left-wing films, and quite kind of anti-American films, especially at the start. Missing is a film that is bitterly opposed to American foreign policy. Massive success, actually, but that was his first film that is predominantly in English. That was his first film to be aimed at an American audience, and it is highlighting the abject shame of the American empire's involvement in the coup against Salvador Allende in 1973.
And also implicitly against other South American countries.
Yeah, these were practices that were going on widely, particularly across Latin America, but in other parts of the world as well.
Because I remember a big plot point being, I think, weren't the government people going to, was it Bolivia next? Or Uruguay? Or something? I don't know.
What I recall is that, like State of Siege, like Zed, this film is incredibly methodical.
Yes, completely. There's some wonderful symmetries in there. Like, I know the father character, I remember, he has this sort of speech for the wife character, and he's like saying, your generation, you're so, why do you want to change it? We got a good system. This is the best way of life in the world. And then later on, exactly. And then later on, the U.S. Embassy staff say the exact same fucking speech to him.
It's this really kind of like procedural. It's a word that people are irritatingly...
Procedural's a good word.
A word that people are irritatingly using to describe Keir Starmer all the time. Forensic. This is such a forensic film. It really goes, as with some of the others we'll talk about, it goes into the minutiae about how right-wing authoritarian politics unfold, and how they're unleashed into the world, and how they solidify their positions.
What it looks like on the street level, to some extent.
The two films that the two of us watched to talk about with regard to Costa-Gavras are his 1982 film Missing, which is, as we say, his first American film, but was made in Mexico, and so we should maybe say his first English language film. But no, it says country United States. Distributed by Universal, produced by Polygram.
Oh, yeah.
So those are companies.
I remember seeing their logo.
Score by fucking Vangelis, who did Blade Runner score. This film, like many of Costa-Gavras' other films, deals with right-wing authoritarianism in the form of Pinochet's coup in Chile in 1973 against Salvador Allende, and this has a big significance. It kind of links together this film with State of Siege, the other film that both of us watched for this episode.
Yeah.
Which, although I have to clarify again that I watched it 2 months ago or something. But State of Siege is a film that's about Uruguayan politics. It was released in 1972, and at that time in 1972, Salvador Allende was president. And there was sufficient political freedom, the freedom of speech and artistic expression in Chile that Allende allowed Costa-Gavras to come to the country and make this film. There were some people in Chilean society, even on the left, who actually opposed this film being made. Gavras had actually made a lot of enemies on the left because he'd immediately followed up his breakthrough film Zed, a political masterpiece from 1969 about the Greek military coup, with a film called The Confession, which to this day I think is his only film where the bad guys are communists. It's a film where, like the other films, in fact, it stars Yves Montand, and he plays this Communist Party official in Czechoslovakia. He's literally a minister in the government, and he is accused of, like, crimes, you know, like plotting against fucking communism,
Whoa.
whatever. Yeah, I know, and they just, like, torture him and interrogate him for just fuckloads of the film. Then, like, about halfway through, you discover that he's not dead. And so you're kind of like, okay, so, like, again, it's that procedural thing. It's like, because he gets out of the way the suspense thing. Like, you're not guessing. Just like the left-wing politician is killed 12 minutes into Zed. He stops you guessing about how is this going to turn out. You know that the person is fucking dead.
And in Missing...
Or not dead.
You're pretty sure you know what happened to the guy.
I feel
quickly.
In Missing, though, it's kind of a creeping dread that you know he's dead, but there isn't the confirmation early on.
Yeah.
There is doubt.
That's
There's that glimmer of hope that makes it all the more devastating when it is revealed, yeah, he was just butchered by the Chilean military like so many others in Santiago Stadium.
I feel like I at least was always sure straight away that he's being arrested. I don't know if he's dead, but he's being arrested.
The thing is that, yeah, I guess we're watching it with historical hindsight, but I mean, I guess we are talking about how we perceive it as a cinematic experience, but Jack Lemmon's character, of course he doesn't think that his son
he's
has
not
been killed,
crazy.
because he thinks society works in a certain way, and that there's a certain moral way that things are done, that people conduct themselves, and that there's a certain level of standards.
Which, as like a middle-class American at that time, you would be perfectly normal to think that, probably.
Yeah, so this is the kind of the crux of the film, which is that Jack Lemmon, who gives an absolutely terrific performance, up there with Yves Montand's performances in Gavras' films.
Yeah.
He is this middle-aged businessman. It's not particularly conservative, not particularly liberal either, just kind of bit in the middle, really.
Like
just
Republican light, he felt to me.
I wasn't sure if he was a left-wing Republican,
like
quote-unquote.
old-school Republican light, I don't know.
Yeah, like old-school Republican, like the equivalent of a One Nation Tory over here or whatever, or if he was a right-wing Democrat. I honestly...
Similar.
Literally,
similar categories.
Yeah, it's the same fucking thing. You know, like, honestly, it doesn't matter. You can tell his worldview. It's broadly liberal, which means broadly reactionary.
You could see him voting for Joe Biden.
Yeah. You see him being Joe Biden. I mean, it is so interesting that he gets wind that his son, who's kind of a radical, it's just come to mind, actually, that he's talking to the officials in Chile, and they're kind of like, oh, so what were your son's political affiliations? And he was like, I would say he was a liberal. Is the daughter-in-law, his son's wife, played by Sissy Spacek, is she there at that time? Because he's definitely not a liberal. His son is 100% a communist.
Yeah, I got the feeling like they were both pretty much radicals, right?
Yeah. I think
to some extent or another.
Yeah, it's worth saying that Allende's political coalition was like, it was a coalition, it was like a left unity kind of thing. It was broad, it included communists and other socialists. So
the characters in this movie struck me as hippies, basically.
They're
some sort of hippie.
They're the 1960s American New Left. Essentially, they're like the generation that was radicalized on campus. They were like the 1968 Democratic Convention people, you know? They were the fucking people who would have protested at Kent State.
Yeah.
That's the kind of historical, political epoch that these people are part of. Probably like members of the White Panthers or something. But Jack Lemmon he dismisses everything that his radical daughter-in-law says about how there's a fascist coup going on, effectively, and he's like, nah, it's not fascist coup. That's so hyperbolic. These people
You're not getting shot in the street. Here's gunshots in the street.
Yeah, literally, people do get shot in the street. but he's just kind of like, no, fascism, that was like a thing that happened in World War II. That's not happening right now. Look,
it's over.
You can't just go around calling everyone fascist. I mean, I know people on the left who say, again, kind of what I said about Hirohito, like, oh, well, Pinochet wasn't a fascist, he was his own kind of thing. I mean, I kind of disagree with that. I think he basically was a fascist. But Jack Lemmon...
Close enough that you're splitting hairs.
The trajectory of the film is Jack Lemmon's character, who at first is like, oh, all this stuff, you're just a crank. You're like, this is just mad conspiracy theories about how the right are just launching a brutal totalitarian coup that's completely undemocratic and America are helping them. This is just all absurd conspiracy theories. And as the film goes on, he is just, bit by bit, thoroughly disabused of that notion until by the end, he's like a shell of a man who realises that his son has been brutally killed by fascists. He just cannot ignore any longer the reality of what is happening. Because, it doesn't fit into his worldview. So he has to start questioning his worldview. The foundations of it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that's so tragic about it is that for so long, he is just willing to believe everyone but his daughter-in-law. Anyone who gives him that nugget of hope that his worldview is not a lie. And he just gets repeatedly, no. Here's rooms full of dead bodies. Have a look around. It's horrifying. I'm pretty sure I cried at this movie at a couple of points.
Devastating.
It's harrowing.
Both Sissy Spacek and Jack Lemmon are so fucking good in it. It's a really good film. And of course, like State of Siege, it's based on something real that happened. Well, I mean, the coup definitely happened. The film ends in a fascinating way. This is the ultimate bit. So I say that by the end of the film, Jack Lemmon is completely disabused of any notion he has about politics. No, actually, this man is an idealist to the core, because he tells the embassy officials when he finds out his son has been murdered, I just thank God we live in a country where we can still put people like you in jail. The film ends with a postscript stating that after his return to the United States, Ed received the body of his son Charlie 7 months later, making an autopsy impossible, and that a subsequent lawsuit against the US government was dismissed. Yeah, it is totally based on real people, because all the characters in it have Wikipedia pages. Fuck, okay. This is all so fucked up. And that his subsequent lawsuit against the US government was dismissed. It also adds that the State Department denies its involvement in the Pinochet coup, a position maintained to the present day, with just zero credibility.
It makes you think, doesn't it, how people laugh when they hear people believe Kim Jong-un doesn't shit or something. Like the kind of stuff that we swallow without questioning.
Yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, you know, the United States didn't do anything to help Pinochet get into power. Also, you know, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. It's
exactly,
it's more of a fucking conspiracy theory to believe the official line on this stuff than it is to think that something's amiss there. Like I said, that's just not a credible position to maintain at all, that the State Department was not involved in the tragedy of September the 11th, 1973.
Totally.
By the way, such a baller move of Ken Loach when he was asked to do this short film about 9/11 for a film of short films about 9/11, and Loach did a film about 9/11, 1973, and it was like this Chilean guy who'd survived the fucking coup, who was just like, I hope that while I remember America's suffering, you'll remember the Chilean coup of 73, and he talks about it, and it's just like,
fantastic.
Reactionary Americans were so offended by it. It's literally, hang on, Ken Loach, 9/11. To be fair, overall, internationally, it was the most acclaimed short film within that particular anthology, because it was powerful and heartfelt stuff.
You can imagine most of the other stuff would have just been flag-waving, trite.
Sean Penn directed one for it, which is probably a worse atrocity than the actual event. Yeah, it might have been Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu who did a really bad one. Yeah, Empire said that Ken Loach's was the only good one in it, which is very discerning taste from Empire magazine there. Philip French from The Observer, ultra hawk Blairite rag The Observer, said that the most forceful contribution is Ken Loach. So like I say, I bet some of the rotten reviews are really Loach is a cunt, but
Yeah.
I think actually his provocation paid off there, ultimately, because people were like, no, that is actually a bold thing to do, and I respect that.
I especially bet in most of the rest of the world, it took pretty well compared to the US.
Yeah, because everyone is like, yeah, America...
There are other things than America.
America doesn't give a fuck about our tragedy. Why should we fucking give so much of a shit about, 3,000 people? Pinochet killed more than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not even counting the people he disappeared. Like, at least fucking Ed Horman, Jack Lemmon's character, at least he found out that his son had died.
Yeah.
At least he found out the truth.
I did always originally think that he was going to be one of the people who was thrown in the ocean or something. Never found.
It wasn't the ocean in Chile so much. I think it was the Atacama Desert.
Was it
Vast.
both? I'm sure
No,
they did
maybe both.
I don't know. Maybe you know more. You probably do know more.
Well, there's that great documentary by Patricia Guzman, Nostalgia for the Light, which features a lot of stuff in the Atacama.
Oh, yeah.
How there's just so many unidentified human bones out there.
Yeah.
They've not had any kind of like truth and reconciliation thing or anything like that, or a Nuremberg type thing really in Chile. It's a bit buried, similar to how it is in Spain. They've never really come to terms with it. There are obviously people there who that's like all they do. They try and come to terms with it. Much like the filmmaker Patricia Guzman, who pretty much only makes films dealing with the legacy of Pinochet.
Yeah. I mean, as we know from our earlier discussion, is there ever really a reckoning with these things?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, superficially...
You try and you try.
Hitler shot him... Actually, Hitler sort of took the easy way out. Pinochet never had a gun to his head even by his own hand, to my knowledge. No. Pinochet lived a long life. When he came to Britain, he was protected by the Blair government. And of course, before that, by his friends Thatcher and Major. There's places all around the world, like Indonesia, for example. The people there mingle with the people whose families they murdered decades ago. Yeah. There's been no kind of reckoning there. I'm wrong.
Have
in
we
saying
ever done the act of killing?
We've not, but I can't. I'd have to rewatch it.
It would need to be a rewatch. But...
Fuck me! Yeah. Oh my god! The guy has directed more films as well. Josh Oppenheimer, I think.
I know I saw a sequel. The Silence.
The Look of Silence.
The Look of Silence.
Couldn't watch it. Yeah. I didn't try. I should.
Right.
But they're very bleak. Costa-Gavras, at least he makes fiction films. They're kind of thrillers. They're pretty entertaining. Yeah, so let's talk about the other film by Gavras that we watched then, which ties very closely in. So, Missing was obviously set in Chile, but by 1982, the Pinochet regime had been in power for 9 years, and they wouldn't leave power until, I think, 1988. And so they were obviously not able to film the movie in Chile. But State of Siege, we said that this film, meanwhile, was set in Uruguay, but it was shot in Chile while Allende was president.
Yeah.
It's never stated what it's in. I think that was in part because it was trying to kind of say that this stuff happens in a lot of places. Many US officials hated the movie and stated that it was a heap of lies about, really, I wonder why.
Called out.
So, State of Siege is about a real-life event. And like I said, I remembered watching State of Siege on YouTube, the same version that I think I sent you, because it's a really good quality version. But I think I did have that same version downloaded because I watched the special features for it today. Must have downloaded the Criterion edition. And there's firstly a really interesting half-hour interview of Costa-Gavras. And then even more interesting is a 7-minute collection of news footage documenting the case of Dan Mitrione, who was a US aid worker, diplomat,
Got a bit of a cough there.
What did he work for? He worked for a certain organisation.
United Fruit Company?
No, it wasn't.
I know their name comes up in the film.
The International Cooperation Administration. No,
that thing. Yeah.
Here we go. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID.
That's the one.
USAID, yeah, there we go. And the police aid program was reorganized into the Office of Public Safety. That sounds like it's going to be like putting in regulations to like don't put ladders in that particular fucking place next to the can of paint that's going to fall on someone's head. But Office of Public Safety. But it's actually just like the Office of Political Repression, set up by, of course, my hero John F. Kennedy, to provide assistance to US allies in the Cold War. So this shit was what the character played by Yves Montand in State of Siege is all about. The OPS would provide Latin American police forces with millions of dollars worth of weapons and train thousands of Latin American police officers. In the late 1960s, such programs came under media and congressional scrutiny because the US provided equipment and personnel were linked to cases of torture, murder, and disappearance in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. This is how fucked up this is. 2 of those countries, Costa-Gavras hasn't even made a film about. There's so many countries where the USA has done this, but Costa hasn't even made his way into all of them yet. Yeah. But the Office of Public Safety remained immune to public embarrassment as it went about 2 of its chief functions in DC. This is allowing the CIA to plant men with the local police in sensitive places around the world. Sensitive meaning places where, like, the polls were showing the Communist Party ahead. Yeah. And after careful observation on their home territory, bringing to the United States prime candidates for enrollment as CIA employees. Their OPS, their director in Washington was close to the CIA. In the 60s, Brazilian opposition members started whistleblowing on them, basically, to a US senator who tried to disclose their program, but they seemed to be operational for quite a while after that. And here is what it says on their Wikipedia page about Uruguay, their specific involvement in the country where this film is set. The OPS had operated in Uruguay since 1964, supplying the police with equipment, arms, and training. Training involved courses on explosives, assassination, and riot control. Riot control, probably. So you hire a bunch of counter-demonstrators, you get them to come along with bricks and baseball bats and sometimes guns, and they beat up the left-wingers in the riot, and so do the police, and then you've got them under control. Yeah. And I presume that the courses on explosives and assassination were not diffusing explosives and preventing assassinations. Between 1969 and 1973, at least 19 Uruguayan police officers were trained in CIA and OPS schools in Washington, D.C. and in Los Fresnos, Texas, to be taught the handling of explosives. On several occasions, the pupils were not police officers, but individuals affiliated with the Uruguayan right wing. So just like paramilitary thugs. By 1970, the OPS had trained 1,000 police officers in riot control. You know, if you're thinking of doing like some kind of military coup or something, and it seems like, wait, what? The School of the Americas was only created in 2001? That can't be true. Oh, right, no, it was created in 1946. It's just renamed.
That makes more sense.
2001. I was just looking at the School of the Americas because that was essentially where the United States had their thugs, God, some of them probably drawn from the Third Reich, teach all sorts of people from scrolling down the page, and it says Panama. There's a lot about Panama in this section.
Yeah, I bet. Noriega was that?
Yeah, that would be Noriega, who was a US ally until he wasn't anymore, and they did a coup against him. But he was like running bear coke and stuff while he was a US ally. Just like the CIA.
Insert clip from that fucking Michael Bay film where the dictator thinks that he's safe because he's working with Russia and the US. But
I just love that, the Office of Public Safety. Like, just
right.
kind of like
what a
banal,
perfect innocuous name. Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Yeah.
fucking hell. Real 1984 George Orwell kind of stuff. Yeah.
I was thinking, like, somewhat more like the Third Reich, like, Office of Racial Purity, or whatever they called it. I forget the exact term. That's weird.
Yeah, so basically this guy, Dan Mitrione, was an American guy, but his parents were from Italy, and he was born there originally. I think he lived most of his life in America. He was a patrolman, and then he was a local chief of police, which he held for 4 years, and then he joined the Public Safety Program of the International Cooperation Administration. I'm just going to point out that the acronym for this is ICA. I mean, could they be any more fucking blatant with that? Like, literally, just swapped around one letter. Which provided US aid and training to civilian police in third world countries around the world. And then he was posted in Brazil originally, and this is all in State of Siege, isn't it? They mention his time in Brazil.
Yeah.
Then
the boys from Brazil.
The boys from... There we go, the boys from Brazil. He was transferred to Rio de Janeiro in 1962. Before that, he was in Belo Horizonte. He served as a training advisor for another 5 years and then was rotated back to the United States. And he taught for 2 years at the OPS International Police Academy in Washington, D.C. Now, the way that's depicted in State of Siege is just like this big load of just kind of cops from all different countries, like a rainbow coalition of right-wing cops, and they're, you know, it's just like him and a bunch of other like boring cop men on stage, just like, so you waterboard them like this. Now waterboarding is actually quite tame by the standards of what these guys
you electrocute their testicles like this.
Yeah, that is what they did, isn't it?
Electrocute the underside of their eyeball. All these various weird sensitive areas. Yeah.
So this Dan Mitrione guy, after his, 5 years or whatever in Brazil, he then went to Uruguay. Apparently, the Uruguayan government had its hands full with a collapsing economy, labour and student strikes. Yeah, that sounds very much like a right-wing revisionist history. Well, yeah, exactly. Oh, we better, like, have a police state and, like, ban unions and stuff.
Better go full fash.
Yeah, and the Tupameros, a left-wing urban terrorism guerrilla group. On the other hand, Washington feared a possible victory during the elections of the Frente Amplio, a left-wing coalition, also on the model of the Cuban-supported victory of the I get distracted like ranting here, but they're talking about on the model of the also Cuban fronted Salvador Allende coalition. Also Cuban supported. Like, that's anything equivalent to like being American supported. You could like
that's
say
some
about
confusing syntax as well.
Yeah, this feels like it's written by someone who is either a right-wing partisan or just trying to be overly objective in a very clunky way. But I wonder if the US were like more worried about the prospect of that left-wing coalition having a legitimate electoral victory than they were about the collapsing economy, which was probably because they were fucking it up, doing economic warfare as America always does, labour and student strikes. Oh, it's terrible when people like stand up for themselves. Better call.
I bet one of the things that the students wanted was less U.S. involvement.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just gonna throw it out there.
The OPS had been helping the police since 1965, providing them with weapons and training. Former Uruguayan police officials and CIA operatives stated Mitrione had taught torture techniques to Uruguayan police in the cellar of his Montevideo home, including the use of electrical shocks delivered to his victims' mouths and genitals. He also helped train foreign police agents in the United States in the context of the Cold War. It has been alleged that he used homeless people for training purposes, who were executed once they served their purpose. Mitrione was kidnapped then by the Tupameros, the left-wing guerrillas, in 1970, demanding the release of 150 political prisoners, and then he was found shot dead in a car. So doesn't the film start with a cop finding his body in a car?
Yeah, I think so.
His wife's crying and stuff, and you're like, oh, how did he get here then?
That's sort of Hollywood Boulevard?
Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard, yes.
I wanted to read you this bit on this is just a good-ass Wikipedia page. So he was shot twice in the head, but with no other visible signs of maltreatment, other than the fact that he'd been shot in one shoulder during the kidnap itself. But here's the thing, the wound had been treated in captivity by the left-wing guerrillas, as well as doing no other visible maltreatment. Anyway, in his autobiography, Ambassador Ortiz, Lessons of a Life of Service to Fascism, which I'm sure is a terrible book. Frank V. Ortiz, whose appointment as Deputy Chief of Mission at the United States Embassy in Montevideo coincided with the kidnapping and killing of Mitrione. He wrote, "My first duty on my first day in Montevideo," I'm gonna say that right one time, Montevideo was to...
I like that you take like 4 goes every time.
Was to attend a memorial service for Dan Mitrione, a former chief of police from New Mexico who headed the US mission to train the Uruguayan police to combat terrorism. He fucking admits it himself. To combat terrorism. Just 4 days before we arrived, the two Primeras had kidnapped him, blah blah blah. They also captured the head of the commercial section of the embassy by hitting him on the head, wrapping him in a rug, and tying him in the back of the pickup. Fortunately, he worked his ties loose and jumped out of the pickup while it was still speeding down the road. That, by the way, is a hilarious scene in the film.
It is.
Costa-Gavras confirms in the interview that he totally played it for laughs. Because he's just like, well, look, life is not this kind of just completely do a serious thing. Even at the most horrible times, there are just moments where the pall is broken by just a moment of comedy when you least expect it. There's a couple of little bits like that in there, but that's the main one. The terrorists also tried to take... No, never mind. They tried to kidnap some other guy and failed because he honked his car horn. But poor Mitrione, he says, they tied him up, tortured him, and finally killed him. There's no fucking... The torture thing, by the way. No fucking lie. no evidence of that. Yeah. No visible signs of maltreatment. I don't know. Maybe they were waterboarding him. The version that Costa-Gavras tells definitely doesn't involve any torture. They did kill him, but in state of siege. He's given a pretty fair trial. I have to say it's a much fairer trial than the one given to the communist guy by the other communists in The Confession.
Right. Yeah, it's a pretty fair shake.
But just going back to the history of it for a second, I mean, this is where like the plot thickens. So he was obviously killed. The torture thing is disputed. I mean, some people dispute that Dan Mitrione was complicit in torture and in teaching people in Latin America to do it, which, bullshit. Those people are all, like, fucking deep state stooges. Fuck the lot of them. They're all apologists for war crimes. But on one day, almost 17 years ago, this New York Times piece from 1987 reads, Dan Mitrione, an American police advisor, was kidnapped by Tupamaro guerrillas as he left his house in suburban Carazo. 10 days later, his body was found in an abandoned car. The kidnapping and killing became the basis for the Costa-Gavras film State of Siege, which glorified the guerrilla movement and implied that the United States government, through its Public Safety Assistance Program, was helping to train Latin American police forces in methods of torture. Oh, what an outrageous allegation! Thank God the New York Times, is making sure democracy doesn't die in darkness. Oh, that's the Washington Post, I think. But still, it's just amazing, these people, especially in the Trump era. They all hold themselves up as, speaking truth to power. And you get just, two total dishonest mischaracterizations about a film in
such
one
reactionary
go.
Bullshit.
It does not glorify the guerrilla movement. Yes, it's sympathetic to their political aims, but Gavras is unmistakably... I mean, if you listen to the interview, he's on the record as being personally opposed to the acts of violence, strategically and morally. And the point he's making is that these people were driven to the point of violence by a society that is becoming increasingly violent, where it may on the surface resemble a democracy, but in every other aspect is inching further and further towards a kind of fascist state, which was definitely happening in Uruguay at that time. Although his actions are portrayed as being repugnant, they don't really demonize the Yves Morlon character, the torturer guy based on the real dude.
Yeah.
He's completely humanized. You see him with his family, you see him having reasonable conversations. You or I won't agree with what he says, but
yeah.
like we say, the communist guerrillas give him a reasonably fair trial. He puts his own side forward, and they let him put it forward very eloquently. They just have the proof that he's in on this stuff. Something I think that is a really remarkable thing is where they have the vote on whether to kill him or not. That just a great sequence. It's where the guy is just sitting on the bus, and one by one, all the people come in, and he says something like, what does he say? It's not a matter of heart. He doesn't have any. It's a matter of politics.
Ideology or something. It's not a matter of ideology. Yeah, I don't know. Something along those lines.
Something like that, yeah. And Costa-Gavras is the guy interviewing him, and Gavras concurs that it's like that guy is almost hoping that people will say no. And of course, they don't. There's a couple of no's, but people overwhelmingly agree to kill the guy. Because I guess there's this kind this sort of disciplined cadre behaviour on the left at that time, especially in really far radical left groups. They're very much about following a particular line, especially in these guerrilla groups. But yeah, he is of course eventually killed. I want to get to the interesting historical bit about his killing. So back to this New York Times article. So there's that paragraph which is just straight up lies for the first fucking first sentence, which is all about nonsense about glorifying the guerrilla movement, and implied that the United States government was helping. It didn't imply, it alleged. It's pretty different. It didn't skirt around the edges. It didn't beat around the bush. It was like, this is what's fucking happening. Anyway, today the man who led the Tupameros says the guerrillas had not planned to kill Mr. Mitrione, but that it had occurred because of a breakdown in communications after the Uruguayan security forces captured the leaders, who were unable to send instructions to those holding him. The guy was released from prison and pardoned in 1985 after the armed forces turned over power to an elected government. Mr. Sendik was at this point in 1987 working with other former guerrillas to find a place for the national liberation movement on the legal political scene. Mr. Sendik, speaking recently about the political crime that thrust Uruguay into the international limelight, said that Mr. Mitrione had been selected as a target for kidnapping because he was helping to teach riot control procedures to the Uruguayan police. Although not specifically accusing Mr. Mitrione of instructing in torture, as was suggested in State of Siege, he said student demonstrators had been killed by the Uruguayan police as a result of the anti-riot training. When I was doing my research earlier here, some people try and use that guy not mentioning torture in regards to Mitrione in this particular interview as something to exonerate Mitrione. I found a big thing that was just accusing State of Siege of being a pack of lies. And I was like, I know you are, but what am I? This seems like lies to me. Because they were just kind of saying, nowhere in these quotes from this one guy in the movement do they mention this guy being complicit in torture anywhere. And it's like, well, it also says in here that a bullet passed through his cheek and took off part of his tongue in 1972. So maybe, there was some communication issues when him relaying this information to Shirley Christian.
Yeah.
So, oh no, he didn't torture people. Well, sorry, he very likely did torture people, but it wasn't mentioned this one time by this one guy. But he did, teach the police techniques with which to kill students. Oh, no. This guy totally vindicated, exonerated in the eyes of God. Fucking vindicated. Fucking vindicated. I feel so elated to be fucking vindicated. An American. And listen to this. So here we've got the shadowy anonymous source briefing the New York Times with the American line here. An American familiar with Mr. Mitrione's work at the time the guy who fucking, like, plugged the circuits into people's nipples, said it was true that Mr. Mitrione was giving anti-riot training, but it had focused on ways to put down demonstrations, quote-unquote, without creating martyrs. What does that mean? Something. I'm just having to assume that's something worse than death.
That does seem a little different than without killing people. Like, you phrased it that way on purpose. I don't know.
Just making sure they don't have any, like, kind of afterlife. Or just, like,
they get death, but it's going to be anonymous and you're not going to be known for it.
Killing them and smearing them at the same time as doing it. So
yeah,
no, but they literally
some 1984 shit.
No, but they did do that in all these places to communists and socialists, man. Anyway, Mr. Sendik, okay, so this gets good. Oh, here we go. The United States cut off training for police forces in Uruguay in 1973, and by July 1st, 1975, Congress shut down all such assistance programs. I mean, I don't buy it. If it did cease in 1975, it was temporary, because, like, what the Reagan administration did in Latin America in the following decade was fucking, like, turbocharged Nixon-era meddling.
What they mean is that it ceased operating under that name, had they rebranded.
Yeah. What do we call it now? The Organization of Nice Things and Helping People. Mr. Sendik, so this is the leader of the guerrillas, the left-wingers. Mr. Sendik said that he had not been part of the command that kidnapped Mr. Mitrione and held him in a house in Montevideo for 10 days, but was making the decisions from another location in the city, accompanied by other members of the Tupamaro Directorate. Mr. Sendik said that the Tupameros demanded the release of about 150 imprisoned guerrillas and threatened to kill Mr. Mitrione if the demand was not met. The Tupamero leaders decided later, he said, that if the government continued to refuse the demand, they would hold Mr. Mitrione indefinitely instead of killing him. But after they'd decided that they were going to spare his life, a week after the kidnapping, on August the 7th, 1970, the police raided the house where the leadership was staying and captured Mr. Sendik and the others. A short time later, he said, the replacement leadership, which also knew of the plan to keep Mr. Mitrione alive, was also captured. Those captured lost all contact with the others, and when the deadline came, the group that was left with Mitrione did not know what to do, so they decided to carry out the threat.
Makes sense, I guess.
I love in the film that Mr. Mitrione, played by Yves Montand, he is like, well, if I was in your position, I would kill me. And he does not in any way expect America to release the hostages and let him out, because
he knows how they play.
The institutions are like, I think maybe I was looking for the word bureaucratic earlier when talking about Gavras' films, because he always gets into the nitty gritty, like the men in suits in rooms talking about, right, how are we going to do this then? Like his great film special section, which he made after this, which is about Vichy France. And it's where a Nazi is killed by the resistance in France, basically. And so High Office in Germany calls up Vichy and they're like, we want 6 people executed because of this. We don't care who, just execute 6 people. Well, firstly, they all kind of panic, all these terrible Vichy collaborator sellout bastards. They're all worried about their own... They want to protect their own necks, so they all go along with it. They're like, oh, okay, round up 50 Jews and 50 communists. When in doubt, and you're running a fascist government, obviously, just round up some Jews and some communists, and we'll just pick 6 of them to execute. But the whole film, it's this really, again, procedural, bureaucratic kind of thing, where the Vichy government are trying to change the law so that they can retroactively charge people with crimes after they've already killed them without trial. It's amazing. It's literally pure Costa-Gavras. That's the most kind of him thing you can imagine. I think I just mentioned Zed to you earlier, And I was like, oh, it's about the Greek coup, man. It's real classic Costa-Gavras. And you're like, yeah, sounds it. Because he's just done so many films about coups and shit, you know? But
completely.
I loved Special Section. Sorry, I mean, I love Special Section, but I love State of Siege as well, man. Whatever the fucking New York
really
Times
enjoyable
scumbags
film.
say about it. Yeah, it's so... That's the thing, these films aren't... I've never found a Costa-Gavras film, apart from maybe Capital, which he made in 2012, and that's about, like, finance rather than coups and stuff, so it's not as exciting.
By the name, yeah.
Well, and he's old now, so he's just, you know, he just hasn't got the energy he used to. But all these films, they don't feel, like, dry. You sit down and it's like, here's the static camera pointed at a commune where they're like sewing shirts for 3 hours. It's not like that kind of thing. Christ, there's a lot of cuts. In fact, he doesn't give a shit about linear narrative. I mean, the narratives are fairly linear, but he'll do lots of flashbacks and shit. A lot of contextual stuff. If someone's telling somebody about something, then he'll be like, well, why not show it? Why not? They're just such exciting films, and they've always got these, like we said at the end of Missing, when Jack Lemmon says, I'm so glad I live in a country where I can send men like you to prison. And then the caption comes up like, yeah, no, they all got away with it. He loves these kind of like bitter punchlines, Zed being one of them, where finally all the bastards who assassinated this left-wing politician, played by the great Eve Morland, who plays our favourite torturer in State of Siege. He gets assassinated, and then finally at the end of the film it looks like the magistrate has started to unpick the conspiracy, and he's calling in all the generals and stuff on charges of murder, and then it's like loads of the witnesses died mysteriously. The generals were all cleared, and the military then took over the country, and they removed the magistrate from his job. Oh, and then you find out why the film's called Zed, because they do a big list of things that government banned, including just like Freud, the Beatles, like McDonald's, I don't know, loads of stuff, and the letter Z, which means he lives in Greek. Fascism is crazy, dude. Like, that's the thing.
Right.
Yeah, like, well, what's up with these people? But yeah, the reason that Costa-Gavras didn't make any films in Greece in that period was because he wouldn't have been able to use the letter Z in Greece, let alone make a film.
It's a good reason, yeah.
Should we, just so I can point you in the direction of what to watch next, should I just kind of skim some of his other films?
Of course, go for it.
I definitely think you should watch Section Special.
Special Section's on there, yeah.
Special Section is really, really, really good. That's classic stuff. The Confession is really, really, really good.
That's also on this trusty post-it note.
I've not seen Woman Light, nor Hannah Kay, nor Family Business. But
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
I thought you were just saying
that
I
was a
haven't
question.
seen that either. No, I really like Amen. For me, that's his best late period film. Actually, it came out in 2002. Stars Ulrich Tukur and Matthew Kasevich. As a scholar of the Holocaust, you will enjoy this one.
Yeah.
During World War II, Kurt Geissen, a Waffen-SS officer employed by the SS Hygiene Institute, designs programs for the purification of water, so, you know, like filtering out the fluoride to keep the German people heterosexual, and the destruction of vermin. He is shocked to learn that the process he has developed to eradicate typhus, Zyklon B, can you see where this is going, is now being used for killing Jews and other undesirables in extermination camps. So he basically tries to tell the Pope about this, and everyone in the Catholic Church is just like, nah, dude, that's just bullshit. What are you... Again, it's just like the Missing thing of, like, all the people in the Catholic Church are like, dude, that's just a conspiracy theory. What are you talking about? You've got a tinfoil hat on your head, you absolute crank. And he's like, no, I'm in the SS. I've seen it with my own eyes. I made the Zyklon B. They're like, nah. So basically the church, like, constantly shift the goalposts. He finds a priest who does care, who will like use him as a whistleblower. This guy's played by Matthew Kasovich, who directed La Haine. He's a young Jesuit priest, and he's like the only person who cares about what he's told. Like, after the bishop that he works for, the main character, the SS guy, goes to the bishop and tries to tell him about it, the guy's like, what? This is outrageous! Get out of here! And then the priest is just kind of like, oh, you know, I think that's bad that they're doing that. And then eventually he gets an audience with the Pope, and then they're all just like, hey, mind your tone. It's like, don't be so emotional when telling the Holy Father about this awful genocide that's happening. Once they've got through this isn't actually happening, and then we just object to the manner in which you're trying to tell us, it just becomes absolutely crystal clear that they just don't care.
Right.
There's this one particularly striking scene in it where, I mean, I'm not a Catholic, so I forget like the terms for these, but the Pope is giving like his New Year's address or something, Christmas or New Year's. Either way, the priest has been tipped off that the Pope is gonna come down really hard against the Nazis and the treatment of the Jewish people. He's gonna bring some fire and brimstone. So the SS officer and the priest, they're like spending Christmas together, I guess. They're crowding around the radio like, oh, I can't wait for the Pope to just use his moral authority to condemn this crime in the starkest possible terms. And then the Pope gets to the bit in the speech, and he's just like, yo, you know, hate is bad, yeah, on all sides, right? Violence begets violence, yeah, and you know, basically, you know, be nice to people, just take a chill pill, guys. You know,
sounds like an interesting film, yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of complicity between the Catholic Church and the Nazis.
Totally.
It's been well documented.
I mean, it actually sounds similar to a film I mentioned before, but without the Catholic Church stuff, just about the making the chemicals and then being like, oh shit, I realize now what I'm involved in. I think I mentioned a German film called Council of the Gods, East German movie. That was about
you did.
A scientist who is involved in making Zyklon B. And then he realizes what they're using it for, and he's like, oh, this is bad. But yeah, interesting. Cool, I'll check it out.
I mean, it's interesting.
That was Amen, right? Or
Yeah. Amen, amen, however you... Potato.
However you say it.
It's very interesting film, though. I mean, I thought it was a compelling drama. Apparently it's mostly fiction, but I mean, for very real documentation of the Catholic Church's complicity in the Holocaust goes beyond what is in this. Wow, okay, so this film also features a thinly veiled version of Joseph Mengele, simply called The Doctor, like Doctor Who. He goes to Argentina at the end with the help of the Cardinal. But yeah, it's a really good film. That's, like I say, the last really good film by Costa-Gavras I've seen, although I haven't watched his new one with Varoufakis yet. In terms of his American films, like I say, Missing is a masterpiece. But after that, Betrayed from 1988 is kind of a really interesting film because it's written by Joe Eszterhas, who hasn't, I think, done any work in about 30 years, but he was at one point a really, really highly paid Hollywood screenwriter. He wrote Basic Instinct and stuff, and Showgirls. I mean, writing two Paul Verhoeven films is pretty good, better than most people have done. 2 for Verhoeven and 2 for Costa-Gavras. You know, working with a couple of decent directors. But yeah, basically a hack. And he famously wrote that mad... Mel Gibson asked him to write a film about the Maccabees because Mel was trying to make amends with the Jewish people. And Joe Eszterhas is like a weird philo-Semite. And he wrote this book about how Mel Gibson was just like a angry anti-Semitic weirdo while they were trying to make this movie. It's called Heaven and Mel. But yeah, I just think it's so fascinating that these two people ended up together. Although Eszterhas, interestingly, his father was actually some kind of a fascist. Eszterhas learned at age 45, so he lived in a child refugee camp in Austria as a child. He was born in 1944. At age 45, he learned that his father had concealed his World War II collaboration in the Hungarian government after the German occupation of Hungary. and that he had organised book burnings and produced anti-Semitic propaganda. After this discovery, he cut his father out of his life entirely, never reconciling before his father's death. So, like, yeah, Joe Eszterhas is like a pro-Israel weirdo, but on the other hand, there is like this genuine, deeply felt personal reason why he feels strongly against fascism and anti-Semitism. He portrays Gibson in his book as a man fueled only by hatred. Apparently he was so afraid of Mel Gibson that he slept with a golf club in his hand. Right, so this does actually prefigure, not portrayed, but the film Music Box from 1989. Eszterhas learned in 1990 that his father was then being investigated by the US Justice Department for writing anti-Semitic propaganda in Hungary during the 30s and 40s. He refused further contact with his father after this revelation, which he later claimed to have regretted, saying, "When my father was in a Hungarian old age home, the nurses kept calling and saying, 'He's dying and he needs to see you.' Not going was a huge mistake. I've asked God to forgive me, but I don't think I'll be forgiven." Eszterhas is a Republican. Joe Eszterhas. Trump is an a-hole, but I'm still not voting for Hillary. Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, that probably means he did vote for Trump, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, like, apparently he did write a film as recently as 2006 about Hungary's revolution of 1956. But anyway, I'm going to talk about his second film with Costa-Gavras now, because I've just led into it with stuff about his dad being a Nazi when I got confused and meant to talk about
Is it
the
Music
trade
Box
instead.
or...
Yeah, Music Box is the Nazi dad one. So, Jessica Lange, she's like a hotshot, top-flying lawyer. I watched another film written by Joe Eszterhas called Jagged Edge the other day, which stars Glenn Close as this like hotshot, high-flying lawyer. And it's like the same script as this, but with like the Nazi stuff taken out. It's just like he literally just took that and was like, I need to express this incredibly personal thing in my life. Well, I'm just going to rewrite this fucking mediocre courtroom drama to be... Actually, I quite like this film because just the fact...
It was a good rewrite, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was better than Jagged Edge. Maybe if I'd have watched Jagged Edge first, I'd have preferred Jagged Edge. But there's a similar thing in them, in that Jeff Bridges is this like charming rich guy who's accused of murdering his wife in Jagged Edge. And he clearly did it the whole film. And they start sowing doubt that he did do it. But even when they're sowing doubt that he did do it, you're thinking... They're only sowing this doubt as a narrative device, and then they're going to turn it back around and reveal that he did do it, which indeed they do. And this film is exactly like that, in that, like, it's blatantly obvious from the start that the guy is a Nazi. Right at the start, he's like, "Oh, you know, I was always involved in anti-communist organizations." It's like anti-communist organizations, like the
Red
Nazi
flag.
Party. Again, here's a quote from Joe Eszterhas about what his dad did. "Organised book burnings and cranked out the vilest anti-Semitic propaganda imaginable. He was involved in Hungary's fascist and militantly racist Arrow Cross Party." So yeah, real great guy. But yeah, he's kind of always saying, "Oh, you know, I was always opposed to I was a freedom fighter against the communists." He just keeps saying this stuff to his daughter. And you're like, right from the start, you're like, this guy, he just dislikes communism too much. In the Costa-Gavras film, The Confession, Yves Montand's character, even though he's been, like, imprisoned for fucking 500 years and tortured to within an inch of his life by the communists, in the scenes they've got set after he gets out of prison, he's like, "Yeah, I'm still a communist, of course." Like, you know? So, like, you can suffer the yoke of an oppressive communist government and still fundamentally have communist or socialist politics. But this guy, obviously, just a nailed-on Nazi from the start. So it's just gradually kind of revealed how he's just a massive, massive Nazi piece of shit. And the evidence piles up. It's inspired, obviously, a lot by the Demjanjuk stuff as well, which we've talked about previously on the show.
Yeah.
I don't have too many memories of this, but I liked it a lot more, I think, than his other two American films that I watched. I didn't think that Betrayed was very good. That's the one that stars Deborah Winger. So she plays this FBI person. There's this murder at the start, which is based on the murder of Alan Berg, who was this Jewish American DJ. He was kind of pretty liberal, but he was kind of like a Lenny Bruce liberal. He kind of say crass, offensive stuff.
Right.
You know, he was of his time. He was a shock jock who wasn't on the far right, and he was Jewish, so he'd take on these Nazis on the air, and the Nazis would call up and be like, I'm gonna kill you, and he'd be like, well, fuck you, come and say that to my face. And then one of them did and killed him. Oliver Stone, I think, does a much better dramatisation of Alan Berg's life in the film Talk Radio, written by and starring Eric Bogosian. So the opening sequence basically shows a version of that. And then the FBI undercover agent, played by Deborah Winger, she goes undercover as like a simple farm girl, like in the South. And she falls. She goes down. I mean, she's better at being undercover than John Voight in the Odessa File, I'll say. She goes down and like she starts hanging out with the suspect, who is pre-crack. Tom Berenger plays the Nazi, and he's like super handsome and charming, obviously, and he's a great family man and everything. But obviously, one day he takes her out to like kill some black people, and she's like, "This is bad," but she's got a well, no, she's clearly really upset by it.
It's just... it's one of those things where it's like, I gotta take... The Holocaust happened, and it was a tragedy.
He's just like, God damn, oh, these women, they just can't hack it, you know, it's the good old-timey pursuits of a southern man. But it's just, he just thinks that basically, oh, she wasn't ready, she's just a soft girl or whatever. But I didn't like it. I don't really like all this. Although, remember, I did really like Paul Verhoeven's Black Book, where the Jewish resistance woman falls in love with the Nazi. I felt that was a bit better because the guy didn't actually support National Socialism. He was just a German dude in the army who then betrayed the Nazis.
Certainly more palatable, yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's palatable. You can see why they copped out.
Yeah, it was a bit of a cop-out, but I don't know. I just think it was just gross. She belongs in the FBI. She's a classic cop. Mad City feels very much like a particularly 90s sort of film, and it's just kind of like mass media. What's all that about, eh? 24-hour news. It's crazy. You film it and it's always on. You can just stand there for 24 hours and it's news.
The city is mad, you might say.
What are some other kind of examples of that type of film? Because I swear that it's a kind of 90s thing where they're all just going nuts on the news cycle. And it's all just this wild thing to them, but like you can have like a media event, you know.
It does just seem to have been kind of a trope through the 90s. Yeah.
Just like, oh, the reporters are all camped outside the place. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think this film was very good. Dustin Hoffman, like I say, as he got older, his performances got more and more annoying. John Travolta is not very good in it either. He's pretty annoying in the film, and I don't really get why Costa-Gavras did this film, because I guess, like, John Travolta's character is kind of an honest working guy who gets dicked over because he gets fired, and then he starts this whole thing by accident. But then it's more about just like the media. Oh, they sell you down the river in a heartbeat. Oh, they cause more trouble than they are worth. They don't care about helping people. They just care about the bottom line. It's like, I fucking hate the media. I was just saying earlier how like the New York Times has no right to portray itself in the way it does as these like saviors. Same with the Guardian over here. But there's just something about this particular, I guess, the media circus critique. It just feels so banal, so played out.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all the Costa-Gavras films I've seen for now. I've watched the first hour of The Sleeping Car Murders, his directorial debut, and, you know, I'm looking forward to watching the last half hour, because it was good. Not really political,
Yeah.
It's just a kind of good thriller, but then you see a shot of this woman's bag, and she's got Marx's Capital in it, so...
Cool. Yeah, I've got some movies to watch then for next time.
Thank you for listening to our show, everyone. Check out the classic works of Costa-Gavras. Although, I just want to say one more point on Costa. There's few directors who've made films more in tune with my political views. However, I'm just going to say he is not immune from being a filmmaker of a certain age, in that if you go on his Wikipedia section, there is a section called Defense of Polanski, which includes the quote. He was pointed.
That probably didn't deserve quite such a loud laugh, but I was, yeah.
No, it's bitterly funny though, because it's just like, another man of a certain age disappoints us. But here we go. When asked by Europe One about the director, he said, "Stop talking about rape. There is no rape in this story." Polanski was, of course, convicted of statutory rape, and he served a certain amount of time in prison for it before fleeing the United States when he was out on bail. When the interviewer pointed out the victim was 13, Costa-Gavras responded, "Yes, but if you have seen the photos, she looks 25.
That is awful.
Yeah, but we're like, she looks 25. It's like, you're 13! That's so
I don't know, like,
13!
I think there's not a good way to defend Polanski, but I feel like that's the worst tack to have taken.
No. When Polanski was arrested in 2009 at the Zurich Film Festival, when he touched down in Switzerland, there was over 100 signatures on this open letter from people in the film community in support of Roman Polanski. So, like, I'll just say in advance, Costa-Gavras is on this list. But let me just tell you, just so you don't go away thinking Costa is a uniquely bad figure in Hollywood. Well, he's not in Hollywood, but in film. But go out being disappointed in loads of other artists you like as well. First of all, you'd never expect this one, man. This is totally out of the blue. Woody Allen.
No fucking way.
I know. I just did not see that coming. Next up, Pedro Almodovar. Again, I love all his movies, but the dude is in the Panama Papers. Like, it's not the first time he's an industrial scale tax dodger. This is not the first time Almodovar has disappointed. Fallen. Wes Anderson.
Yeah, I could see that totally.
He's an
big
old
liberal,
guy,
isn't he?
I don't know about his politics, but I just
his movies seem very liberal. I don't know.
yeah, he seems like middle class liberal.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Asia Argento is on this list, and she was actually I think she was one of the Harvey Weinstein accusers. Obviously, that in no way discredits what she said about Weinstein or whoever it was, but it's just an interesting, like, fortuitous historical twist to have her on here. Darren Aronofsky as well.
Oh dear.
Aronofsky,
I like some Aronofsky films.
We talked about this last time.
We talked about it a bit, yeah.
Monica Bellucci, Alfonso Cuarón, the late Jonathan Demme, Stephen Frears, British director. Yeah, Costa-Gavras, there he is. Oh, Terry Gilliam. Somebody who's got a few accusations swirling around him. Alejandro González Iñárritu, Harmony Korine, presumably making a provocation, as he so often does. John Landis, fresh from just murdering kids. Do you reckon Roman Polanski in 1983 or whenever it was signed a petition like, John Landis innocent, John Landis not child killer, kids had it coming. Here's an interesting one. Although, again, bear in mind Polanski is a Holocaust survivor. Claude Lanzmann, director of Shota.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned Patricio Guzman only makes films about the Chilean barbarity. Similarly, Claude Lanzmann really only makes films about the Holocaust. I have to admit I haven't seen any of his work. Wong Kar-wai is on here. David Lynch.
Oh yeah, that's disappointing.
Lynch is a bit of a dirty
his politics
old man.
were never that great.
I love Lynch, but
Blue Velvet.
Good
film, but it's creepy.
His stuff is creepy. The man's in another world. Michael Mann. Michael Mann's a very manly director. He's of course defending patriarchy here, as you'd expect, the manliest of filmmakers. Alexander Payne, the like Woody Allen, another kind of like he wrote a film about guys drinking wine sideways,
right. Right.
A depressed middle-aged man who's been dumped by his girlfriend goes off and fucking drinks wine.
Yeah.
More of the Woody Allen dinner party set. Hang on. Julian Schnabel, Martin Scorsese.
Oh, the boy.
Paolo Sorrentino. I love Sorrentino, obviously. The young pope, the new pope, all the popes.
Oh, yeah.
Tilda Swinton.
Okay. I just watched Okja the other night, actually. Speaking of which.
Oh, cool. Another hit from the bong. just a couple...
I don't know why I found that so funny.
Oh man, I stole it off Emmett anyway. He keeps saying it on his podcast, and I swear he must have stolen it from someone as well. But anyway, just a couple more.
Art is theft.
Yeah, exactly. Bertrand Tavernier. He's another leftist director, basically, who's on this list. Tom Tykwer, whatever, who directed V for Vendetta, and Wim Wenders. So just some proper legendary people. I bet you that maybe like 10, if that, of those people would sign this open letter now in 2020.
Right. The climate has changed a little.
It's like Woody Allen and like just be like Woody. just like hey, will nobody else stick their head out for our friend Roman?
Basically, it would be a list of confessions.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, I think I wanted to close on that because that's the real. So everyone who listens to our movie episodes now is going to be like, "Oh fuck, I really like that director." At least probably like twice or 3 times in that list.
The whole of Hollywood is practically involved. It's
I think so.
Conspiracy of wealth and power.
Right. Okay, man.
Alright, it's been live.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Peace, man.
Cool, man.